On today's show, we will be talking about what it means to show up and lead as our authentic selves. I am your host, Tawanna Streater, and with me today is Corliss Garner, the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer of Old National Bank. Welcome, Corliss.
Hi, Tawanna.
Before we dive into this juicy topic, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, first of all. So delighted to be on the show. So delighted to be here. So again, my name is Corliss Garner. I am a Chicagoan. I am a West Sider. I was born and raised on the West Side of Chicago, and I still live on the West Side of Chicago. I am the daughter of a mother who came from the South, Shelby, Mississippi, and came to Chicago to find better, as a lot of Black people did in that day and age. I lead diversity, equity, and inclusion for Old National Bank. And for those who may not be as familiar with Old National Bank, First Midwest Bank recently merged with Old National Bank. It's not a new bank, but it is a new bank in the Chicagoland market. So I've been with that company for 3 years, and I'm the Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer. But I've been in banking for over 30 years, and I've done a number of different things in the bank. Half of my career has been on the client management side, where I work directly with clients, and the other half has been in roles like corporate philanthropy, community engagement, and now diversity, equity, and
diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm glad you said that you were a West Sider. Born and raised and still live on the West Side.
I do.
And I am a South Sider, born and raised.
Okay.
But I think it's important because I'm all about representation matters. All about that. So I think it's important to note those two facts about both of us, because I want people to see someone from the West Side who is doing wonderful things and has been doing wonderful things for more than 30 years. And, you know, what it really means to be an authentic Black woman showing up to work in a historically predominantly white male industry as that Black woman and leading. So what does it mean to be authentic? What does it really mean?
Yeah, that's a big word. It's a buzzword today. And I think that's a loaded question. From my perspective, it's been a journey, right? So telling you about my mom coming from the South, who was not an educated woman, but somehow, you know, made her way through all of the isms. When her daughter got a job at a bank, she was elated, excited. She was also sending me messages that said, keep your head down and make sure you keep that good job, right? Because that wasn't something that was accessible to her. So I'm a good daughter. I listened to my mother, right? So I kept my head down. I did my job. I did my job very well. And, you know, I was in an institution that is predominantly white, that is predominantly male. And you figure out just how to fit into that, right? And sometimes that means not being your authentic self, right? So for years, that was kind of my mode. But then what I realized is, you know, while that advice from my mom was really sage advice from her perspective, there are two sides to that coin, right? There are pros and there are cons, right? You get to kind of keep your good government job, right? And, you know, get decent enough promotions, decent enough raises, and you're able to do things that perhaps she wasn't able to do. You're able to support your family in ways that perhaps she wasn't able to do. But the flip side to that is you do lose yourself a little bit. And you don't get noticed for who you are.
Exactly.
Right? You don't get noticed for who you are. So you see other people maybe accelerating at a pace much faster than you. And you think like, well, what's
going on?
Right. What's
wrong with me?
Why? Right? So, you know, that advice, I understand exactly where it was coming from. And it served me well in some ways, but in other ways it didn't. So I would say showing up for me as my authentic self was a function of maturity as well. And just getting to a space and place where I was starting to get very comfortable with who I am as a Black woman from the West Side of Chicago, and recognizing that there's power in that.
Yes.
And there is power in bringing that to corporate spaces, to institutions, to systems, because institutions and systems don't change themselves.
Exactly.
People within them do.
Exactly. And it helps to, it informs your job, you know, your daily job functions. When I started in my career, it was keep your head down and just do your job.
That's right.
And then, you know, I straightened my hair. I tried to fit in. And it wasn't until I went natural, wearing my hair curly, that I started to really become comfortable with myself. And then when I started working for Rush, 6 months later, I cut all my hair off.
Yes.
I'm 3 different shades of blonde. I'm experimenting, had never experimented, especially not in the workforce. So I'm experimenting with my hair. And then I realized I'm stepping into my purpose and I am becoming who I am meant to be, who I want to be. And it has been such a wonderful journey getting to know who I am and taking those bits and pieces of me into the workplace and showing up as my authentic self. Now, I don't be all authentic.
Yes. Nobody needs to do that.
Exactly. But there are pieces of me that I bring to work that allows me to show up as my authentic self and be comfortable with my colleagues and be vulnerable and be able to tell my boss, hey, I don't know how to do that. I'm going to need a little bit of coaching, but this is who I am. And I'm asking for help. And, you know, just all of those little various things that I would never have done before. So, but going back to bringing those bits and pieces of your authentic self into the workplace, because I see on Instagram all the time, I'm going to show up as me, all of me, and they going to get who I give them.
Like sometimes I don't like all of me, right?
Exactly.
Sometimes I don't like all of me. So there is a balance to this, right? But I think from my perspective, this word authenticity and showing up, particularly in corporate spaces or majority spaces as your authentic self, it is an act of change. It is an act of shifting what the paradigm has been. And again, institutions don't change themselves. It's people within them that do. So when I show up as my authentic self in my workplace appropriately, right? That gives others permission to do the same. Because that's what happened for me. I remember years ago seeing a Black woman in the bank and she had micro braids. And I had never really seen a Black woman in the bank wear micro braids. And I remember, like, I clearly remember her, distinctly remember her. And that gave me permission to wear micro braids in the workplace, right? So just think about it. Showing up as your authentic self is a way of mentoring others that you probably don't even know that you're doing, because people are always watching. I was watching the Black women in my institution, some who are my dear friends today. And, you know, I watched them and just reveled at how they moved and, you know, took bits and pieces that were appropriate for me to build and mature into who I am as a woman. So it really does matter.
Yeah. I watch how people dress. Because I am not a fashionista at all. And I'm like, sometimes I need a little help on putting outfits together. So working at an all Black organization gave me the opportunity to really figure that out, how to dress in a professional manner, because, you know, you don't always have that. So I appreciated being able to look up to the Black executives there and, you know, take those bits and pieces that fit me, being able to speak, you know, learning how to interact with funders. And then I'll never forget the first time I actually saw a program officer who was a Black woman. I think that's what prompted me to cut all my hair off.
Really?
When I saw her.
Yeah.
And oh my God, it was just like a Black woman. She has this beautiful short afro, and she was just in her, it was just her.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's what I want to be able to show up in whatever way I want to that is comfortable for me. And I love it. So, and being, interacting with you I think you were the first Black woman that I met on the giving side.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I was just in awe. And then when I saw the other person at a foundation, I was just even more in awe, because you show up to these foundation meetings fully dressed in a suit, ready with all of your notes and meeting briefs and everything. And she just sat down, and it was just the most comfortable and relaxed conversation. And it inspired me. Yes. And I'm happy when I see more and more of us in philanthropy, giving, or, the grant making or grant seeking side. And I just love that. Yeah. 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 So it gives me the space to not only show up as my authentic self, but mentor others.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what would you say to a young professional on balancing authenticity and professionalism?
Yeah, I would say, understand your values, one, right? So trying to align your values with an organization that has similar values to you, I think that allows you to show up more authentically in that space. And be clear, I think when folks show up authentically, they do their best work. So it's to the advantage of a company to create environments where folks can show up authentically. That's what I do every day for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Part of my job is looking at our workplace and ensuring that we have an environment that's welcoming to diversity, welcoming to all people, has a spirit of belonging so that people can show up and be happy, right? Be excited to be at the company and be excited to do their best work for our clients. So for young people who are seeking opportunities or who are in spaces, think about your own values and the values of those companies and figuring out where they align. And I think that is a natural fit in terms of showing up authentically. But also be clear, your authentic self. Again, I will say that there are some parts about me that I do not like, right? My own self, right? So it's also about knowing who you are and bringing the best parts of you to spaces for the audiences that are there. I think
we never bring 100% of ourselves to any situation. We are, I know I'm different around my brothers and my mom, and I'm different around my friends. I'm different at work, but I'm never 100% my authentic self in any of those situations because that might be a little too much.
Well, what I would say to that is I think that is a skill where you're able to flex, right? Where you're able to show up in a space in a way that makes sense for that space. It doesn't mean you're not being your authentic self. It just means that you're showing up in that space that makes sense for that space. And that's a skill. That's knowing how to flex and being effective, right? At whatever it is that you're seeking to accomplish. That's agility. That's a huge skill that will serve anyone well in any space that they show up in.
Yeah. When I started working at Rush, the intent was I was going to just put my head down and do my job. That was it. That's not what they hired me for. So they made me, step up And, just they put me in that spotlight. I won't say they made me be the shining star. They put me in the spotlight. They made me be a leader. I could do it.
Yeah.
But I was hiding from past failures, and I just wanted to hunker down, do the job, and just skate by.
And listen, I feel like I'm interviewing you now. How did that make you feel?
Which part? The hiding or them pushing
being pushed
me?
out there, yeah.
It was startling at first. I'm like, man, I just want to do my job. I just want to put my head down and do my job. But then it sparked something. And it made me realize that I was capable of doing it. Especially when you have the support, the guidance, the mentorship, and the proper effective leadership, you can thrive in that environment.
Absolutely.
And I had no intentions on leaving Rush at all, because they embrace cultural differences. They had a variety of employee resource groups. They not inspired, but they motivated you and they pushed you to get involved and be engaged and collaborate across the institution.
Yeah.
And when I had the opportunity to go to the aquarium, it was like, I'll meet to expand my network, but I'm happy because I felt like I belonged. I had a sense of belonging. And one of the first things that I reminded her was, I have short blonde hair. You know that, right? Because we're talking about cultural fit.
Sure.
I'm a Black woman with short blonde hair. That might be a little jolting to some people. And she was like, of course, I've met you before. She came and talked to our fellowship cohort. And I remember, I was like, oh, yeah, that's right. You did. Because to that meeting, I wore a hat. Because I'm not trying to hide myself, but I know that I probably could be it was probably a little strong presence. And I just wanted to dial it back a little bit for that first meeting. And when she was like, yeah, we've met before, I remember that. Yeah. Okay. Is this going to be a cultural fit? I know I can do the job. Although I have some issues with imposter syndrome, I know I can do the job, but is this going to be a cultural fit? Because I'm thriving in this environment where I feel that I belong. And she talked about all these DEI initiatives that they were embarking on. And I wanted to be a part of that. Yeah. Because arts and culture, I feel like, are probably the last institutions that are, really focusing on DEI. And I wanted to be a part of that. Yeah. Is it a cultural fit? I show up every day as my authentic self.
Yeah. I want to pick up on a couple of things that you said, going back to your time at Rush, when you were being pushed out there. I think being our authentic selves is also about self-discovery, right? So as you were being pushed out there into realms that maybe you had not experienced before, you learned something about your authentic self. So you keep building who your authentic self is. The other thing I wanted to pick up on is this word cultural fit. And I was in a seminar years ago and I heard a company talk about how they have X'd out the word fit. Because that is a connotation of you have to come in and assimilate. Right. Rather, they say, am I a cultural add to the organization? So I think sometimes our thinking can get in our own way, right? Like, I want to show up as who I am because I know I can add to this organization. I don't have to come in and fit in. I'm coming in and I'm adding what I bring to the table, right? So I think shifting our thoughts will help expand opportunities and how we look at ourselves authentically, and then ourselves authentically in the spaces that we occupy.
Good point. I love that because I felt that I was a great addition to the team. Some of the things that they were doing that I had no idea that they were doing, you know, just the work that they do in CPS and Black and Brown communities. And that's a passion of mine.
Sure.
And I was like, I want to be a part of that. I want to help, you know, get the word out. And I want to be a part of building on these DEAI initiatives. And I want to be a mentor to young Black professionals who are interested not only in philanthropy, but who are trying to embark on their career journeys. Not a path, because it's a journey.
That's right.
And I feel like I am probably in a great place that allows me to discover some great things about myself as a leader. Rush allowed me to explore and discover things about me as a person, as Tawanna, and what I can add as Tawanna, what I can add to an organization. Now my next journey is discovering myself as a leader, a Black woman who is in a leadership position. And what am I doing to inspire and motivate other young professionals?
Yes. And here's the other thing I would encourage you to think about. Don't think about Tawanna as separate from the leader. Tawanna is the leader, right? So Tawanna is bringing everything that she has to her leadership capabilities. You are the leader, and that is what showing up authentically is. It's not splitting hairs, right? It's not splitting the baby.
Exactly.
You are the leader, and all of your background, all of your experiences, how you were raised, your values, how you see the world, you bring all of that to your leadership style. So bring her with you. Bring her with the leader.
Thank you.
Right? Bring her with the leader, because that is absolutely authentic leadership.
Yeah. So in your various leadership positions, have you ever been faced with imposter syndrome?
Absolutely.
And how did you deal with that?
You kind of lean into it, right? I think as I've gotten older and gotten more mature, like I can recognize it better when I'm in spaces where I may be uncomfortable or I'm like, ooh, can I do this? Do I know this? Who's looking at me? Did I say the right things? You know, always questioning yourself. For me, I allow myself to kind of feel those things and sit with them. And then I remember who I am. Always remember who you are. You know, take yourself back to the things that you have done, to the successes that you have had, to the failures that you've had and what you've learned from them, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's really just about sitting with it and just kind of letting it kind of flow through you, but then kind of sit back and remember who you are. I recently had a meeting where I was presenting and I didn't think it went well at all. And after the meeting, I sat there and I'm like, ooh, that did not go well at all. But then I kind of felt it and I'm like, okay, so, kind of talk myself through it. What are the pros? What are the cons of this? Like, what could go wrong from this? How bad can it get? And then just kind of was like, okay, you got this. Like you can recover from this. You can learn from it and do better next time, right? And then I went around and I asked for feedback. Like, how did you guys think that went? And I got, well, you could have done this. You did this great, but you could have done that. And that's helpful. Yeah. That's helpful.
I think we often shy away from feedback because we have such a negative association with feedback.
Yeah.
And I think mine comes from, you get these good reviews, but then the next thing you know, you're being written up for something. It's like, wait a minute, we just had a great review 2 weeks ago. So my boss is like, I love that you take, feedback very well and you immediately, course correct. Yeah. Isn't that what feedback is for?
That's what it's for. And, sometimes folks, kind of putting my DEI hat on, when you think about underrepresented talent, if you have a white manager, sometimes that manager is afraid to give you feedback for fear of, what perception will I give?
Yeah.
And that doesn't help you as an employee, right? Like getting the honest, candid, constructive feedback. If someone's just telling you, oh, you're great, you're doing all right, you're doing great, but then you don't get the promotion.
Right.
And you're sitting there like, wait a minute, I've been told I've been great for 3 years running and I'm still sitting in the same spot.
Exactly.
Why?
No raise.
Nothing, right? So we do have to get better at supporting people, supporting managers, people leaders, and how to give feedback to folks. And also in how to kind of tap into that elephant in the room that some folks might be afraid to because they're uncomfortable with the cultural difference there, right? Yeah. They're uncomfortable with that and they don't want to be perceived as, oh, am I being racist or am I being sexist or, any of these things. We have to talk about these things in our corporations for us to get better.
Yeah. Well, in our last few minutes, because I would
few minutes.
I would love to continue this conversation because you spoke on something that another issue that I want to delve in, and that's how do we embrace each other? Black women embrace each other and pull each other along. I just read a book, The Other Black Girl, and I have so many feelings about that book.
Okay.
But I want to talk about how we collaborate together and bring each other along as Black women. So I would love to bring you back on the show for part 2.
Oh, okay.
So join us next time on DIY DEI. I am your host, Tawanna Streater. Thank you.